She opened her diner to 15 bikers stranded in the storm, just trying to be kind, but minutes later, something shifted. The way they moved dot the silence. And when the truth came out, the whole town was left in shock. The wind howled like a freight train barreling through the streets of Willow Creek. Inside the Maple and Pine Diner, the windows rattled with each gust, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. It was almost 7 p.m., and Mabel was wiping down the counter for the third time, more out of habit than necessity. The place was nearly empty, just Sheriff Curtis at his usual booth and June Miller, retired nurse, sipping her tea with trembling hands. Everything felt quiet, ordinary, until it wasn't. Headlights slashed through the rain, one after the other, until a line of motorcycles, 15 in total, rumbled to a stop outside the diner. The engines cut out, and a heavy silence fell. They stood there for a moment, soaked and motionless, like shadows frozen in the storm. Mabel's heart jumped. She'd never seen so many bikers at once, not even during the county fair. But then she did what she always did, what her late husband, Tom, would have done. She flipped the sign back to open, cracked the door, and called out, "Come. On in, fellas. You'll catch your death out there." They filed in slowly, boots dripping, leather jackets steaming. No one spoke at first. They sat down in clusters, some facing the windows, some facing the door. Mabel poured coffee and offered them pie. They nodded in thanks, but the way they looked around, it was unsettling. Like they recognized the place, like they were remembering something, and then just as Mabel was refilling a mug, one of them locked eyes with her gray eyes, steady and hollow, and said, "This is where he started, isn't it?" Tom. Mabel Whitaker had never been the kind of woman to chase attention. She preferred small joys refilling sugar dispensers, folding cloth napkins just right, watching the sunrise while brewing the first pot of coffee. She'd run the Maple and Pine for over 30 years, ever since she and Tom bought the place for a song back in '89. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. A squat little building with green shutters and a creaky floor, nestled at the edge of Main Street like a forgotten postcard. After Tom passed away 2 winters ago, heart gave out in the middle of a pancake. Breakfast rush Mabel kept the place going on her own. Not because she had to. The diner barely broke even most months, but because it felt like a way to keep talking to him. Every spatula flip, every jukebox song, every scribbled note on a ticket pad, it all kept him a little closer. People in Willow Creek respected her. They called her Miss Mabel, even though she was married once and widowed now. She was the kind of woman who remembered how you took your eggs and asked about your niece's gallbladder surgery without sounding nosy. Solid, dependable, safe. But that night when the bikers walked in, soaked in silence, something shifted inside her. Not fear, exactly. It was more like déjà vu mixed with static. Like a television tune just slightly off. She kept her hands busy, pouring coffee, offering towels. The locals watched in tight-lipped silence. Sheriff Curtis didn't say a word, but he didn't leave it. Mabel could feel his eyes tracking every move. She caught June Miller whispering to herself. Something about the eyes on that one. Then there was the tall man near the back booth, the one who hadn't touched his pie. He hadn't taken off his helmet. Just sat there, back straight, arms crossed, like he was waiting for someone. Mabel's hand shook a little when she wiped down the counter near him. She told herself it was just the storm, just the tension, just something passing. But then she noticed the patch on his jacket, a dark red wing frayed at the edges. The same one Tom used to keep in the cigar box beneath their bed, the one he swore was just a souvenir from back in the day. That box was still in the attic. She hadn't opened it in years, and now, for the first time, she wondered if she should have. The sound of those engines had lingered, even after they were shut off. It was like thunder that didn't quite roll away, just sat there above the diner, buzzing in the air. Mabel watched through the fogged-up window as the men dismounted. They moved with slow certainty, not rushed, not hesitant either. Each one seemed to know exactly where to stand, where to look, like they'd done this before. They filed in 2 at a time, ducking under the doorway, boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Water dripped from their jackets and pooled around the tables. Most of them wore dark leather, aged and worn at the seams. Their faces were half hidden by bandanas or tangled beards. Not one of them smiled. "Evenin'," one finally said. Voice gravelly but polite. Mabel nodded, motioning to the booths. "Sit anywhere you like. Coffee's hot, pie's fresh." Her voice cracked a bit on the last word. She hoped no one noticed. They spread out 4 to a corner booth, 3 at the bar, the rest dotted around the room like chess pieces. She could feel the tension thickening in the air, like the humidity right before lightning strikes. The regulars stiffened. Sheriff Curtis straightened up in his seat, casually repositioning his badge so it caught the light. Mabel didn't recognize a single one of them, yet there was something familiar, not in their faces, but in the way they looked around. Like people returning to a place they'd only seen in dreams. One man ran a calloused finger along the counter, pausing by a small scratch near the register. Another studied the old black and white photo on the wall. Tom in his apron, arms slung around a much younger Mabel, both beaming behind a triple-decker burger. That photo had been up there for decades. Most folks passed it without comment. This man stared at it for a full minute before nodding once, slow and thoughtful. The biker who hadn't removed his helmet finally did. He had pale, close-cut hair and deep-set eyes that gave away nothing. He sat at the bar, straight-backed and watchful. When Mabel asked if he wanted coffee, he said, "Black, no sugar." She poured, hands steady this time. Outside, the rain pounded harder. The wind moaned against the glass like something ancient. Inside, the diner was still too still. The kind of stillness that only comes before something breaks. And then one of the younger bikers, maybe late 30s, leaned over to his neighbor and whispered, "Does she know?" The other man didn't answer, but Mabel heard it. And suddenly, the scratch on the counter, the photo on the wall, the patch on the jacket, they weren't coincidences. Mabel had always believed that kindness was a reflex. You didn't overthink. You just did the right thing and hoped it came back around. That's how Tom lived, and she tried to honor that. But as she refilled mugs and passed out slices of peach cobbler, she couldn't help noticing the way the bikers tracked her. Movements. Not aggressive, not rude, just aware. Like every gesture she made meant more than she understood. The storm outside rattled the diner's sign like a warning. The windows steamed up from the sudden warmth inside, muting the world beyond into fog and shadows. It made the diner feel smaller, like a bubble holding something in. "Where are you boys headed?" Mabel asked gently, breaking the silence at the counter. The one with the gravelly voice, the one who first spoke, looked up. He had crow's feet around his eyes, but they didn't soften his expression. Nowhere in particular. Just passing through. That didn't sit right. No one passed through Willow Creek in the middle of a thunderstorm unless they meant to. June Miller got up and left, muttering something about her bad knee acting up. Sheriff Curtis stayed. He wasn't eating anymore, just sitting there with that slow, deliberate stillness that only cops and ex-military ever mastered. One hand near his belt, the other wrapped around his coffee like it was an anchor. Mabel kept moving, brought out more pie, extra napkins, tried to smile when their eyes met hers. But each time she felt a strange tug in her chest and unease. She couldn't quite name Dot at one point. She ducked into the back pantry for more creamers and found herself standing there too long, staring at the shelf where Tom used to keep his fishing gear. That shelf had been empty for over 2 years. But suddenly, she wondered if it had ever really been full. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. The men were talking now, but softly, in tones that made it hard to tell if they were reminiscing or plotting. One man, younger than the others, noticed Mabel watching. He tipped his cup toward her and said, "Your husband made a mean pot of chili. Used to say it tasted better in a storm." Mabel's breath caught. "You knew Tom?" The man smiled faintly. "We all did. In different ways." That silence returned, the kind that makes you feel like the floor might give out. Mabel wanted to ask more, but the words stuck in her throat. She just nodded, heart thudding louder than the rain dot, and then, almost as if on cue, the tall man in the back stood up and walked toward the wall of photographs. He reached out and gently tapped one frame. It was a candid shot Tom laughing, surrounded by men in leather jackets. One of those men was him. The moment the man's finger touched the photo, a crack seemed to run through the air, not loud, not visible, but palpable. Sheriff Curtis shifted in his seat. His hand moved off his coffee and onto his hip. Mabel didn't move. She couldn't. That photo had hung there for decades. She'd looked at it so many times she stopped seeing it. But now, framed in the pale light, it revealed something she hadn't noticed before. There were 5 men standing around Tom in the photo. 4 wore leather jackets with red wing patches. She'd never asked who they were. She always assumed. They were old fishing buddies, or maybe customers from the early days. Tom used to say, "Those were wild times, Mabs. Not everything's worth revisiting." She respected that. Or maybe she just didn't want to dig too deep. But tonight, those ghosts had walked through her door dot in the kitchen. Jenna, the youngest waitress on staff, leaned in as Mabel poured more decaf. "Miss Mabel," she whispered, "I think I've seen one of them before." Mabel turned, surprised. "Where?" Jenna hesitated. "Last year, on the news. That guy with the snake tattoo on his neck, he was in a story out of Nevada. Something about a bar fight that turned real ugly." Mabel blinked. "You sure? I'd bet my tips." Mabel looked back into the dining room. The man in question sat calmly, sipping coffee like he had nowhere else in the world to be. Nothing about him screamed danger, but there was something. Coiled beneath the surface like a fuse waiting to be lit, she carried a plate of lemon meringue to a table near the front, passing close to the group clustered by the window. Their conversation hushed as she walked by, but one word lingered. "Ray." That name. Mabel's skin prickled. Tom had mentioned a Ray once, just once and vaguely. Said he owed him something from a lifetime ago. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Tom had been full of little phrases like that dot back behind the counter. She opened the drawer under the register. She wasn't sure why. Maybe for a receipt? Maybe just for something to ground her? Instead, her hand brushed paper old, soft and out of place. She pulled it out. It was a letter, folded neatly, yellowed with time. Her name was written on the front, in Tom's handwriting, but she had never seen it before. Mabel stared at the envelope like it might vanish if she blinked. Her name was written in Tom's hand-looped, slightly slanted, always with the little flourish at the end. It was unmistakable. She ran her fingers over the ink, and her heart pounded so hard she could hear it over the storm outside. She stepped into the small supply room off the kitchen and closed the door behind her. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. The letter felt lighter than it should have, but her hands trembled as she unfolded the single sheet inside. "Mabs," it began. "If you're reading this, then something's come back to haunt. Me or maybe to find you. There's no easy way to explain this, and I sure as hell don't expect forgiveness. Just understanding." Mabel sat down on an overturned crate, breath caught in her throat. "Before we opened the diner, before you and me were Tom and Mabel, I was part of something else. A brotherhood, I guess you'd call it. We rode together, looked out for each other, did some dumb things, and some dangerous ones. But there was one time we did something that never stopped following me." The letter didn't go into detail, but it mentioned a name, Ray Hollister, and a promise Tom had made. Something about protecting what was left, and never letting it come back here. There was also a line that stood out like a crack of lightning. "If they show up, don't be afraid. But don't trust everything they say, not at first, especially not Ray." Mabel folded the letter back slowly, like it might shatter if she moved too fast. This wasn't just about some old biker buddies looking for shelter. This was about something Tom had buried, something heavy enough that he left behind a warning. Back in the diner, the men were quieter now. More focused. The tension hadn't broken, it had just gotten sharper. She tucked the letter into her apron pocket, unsure what to do with it yet. Then she noticed something else. The tall man who had tapped the photo was no longer at his booth. He was standing behind the counter, looking at her husband's old ledger. Calm as if he belonged there, Mabel opened her mouth to speak. But he looked up first and said, "You found it, didn't you?" The power flickered once, twice, and then cut out completely. The diner fell into shadow, broken only by the dull red of the neon sign outside and the green glow of the exit lights. For a long beat, no one moved. Then, almost rhythmically, flashlights clicked on. One biker pulled a candle from his saddlebag, like he knew this would happen. Another produced a Zippo and lit it with a flick. Within minutes, a half-dozen small flames danced on the tables, casting long, twitching shadows across the walls. Mabel lit the emergency lantern from under the sink and set it on the counter. The light was soft and strange. It gave the place a different shape, less like a diner, more like a chapel. Or a confessional. No one tried to leave. The younger biker who had spoken about the chili leaned back in his chair, looking at Mabel with something between nostalgia and regret. "You ever hear how Tom got the name Ghost Hand?" She blinked. "No." He smiled faintly. "Figured." He didn't talk much about the old days. A few of the men chuckled softly, as if sharing a private memory. The sound wasn't mocking it. It was warm, but under it something still felt off. Like this was all happening just a bit too naturally. One of the older men pulled a chair closer to the candlelight. "There was a winter back in '93, he said, voice gravelly and deliberate, "out near Fairbank. We were caught in a snowstorm, worse than this, lost 3 bikes. One of our guys was bleeding out bad hit from some small town deputies who didn't ask questions first. We thought he was a goner." The man leaned forward, eyes on Mabel. Tom didn't hesitate. Rode back through the storm, alone. Came back with gas, food, and a first aid kit. Saved the guy's life. Disappeared the next morning like it was nothing. That's who your husband was. Mabel swallowed hard. She didn't know this Tom, not really. She knew the man who danced to Patsy Cline in the kitchen, who cried at dog movies, who made waffles shaped like hearts every Valentine's Day. But not this outlaw. Not this myth. Then the quiet one, gray-haired, square jaw, silent since arrival spoke. Tom was a good man, but he got caught in something bigger than all of us. And when he walked away, it didn't end. It just paused. Mabel stared at the flickering light. "What paused?" she asked. There was a pause, just long enough to build dread. The man answered softly, "A debt." And in that moment, Mabel realized something chilling. They weren't just here because of Tom. They were here because of her. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, the thunder sounded angrier now, like the sky itself was reacting to the truth unraveling inside the maple and pine. Mabel stood behind the counter, the weight of Tom's letter pressing against her chest. Her hands were clenched, though she hadn't noticed until her knuckles began to ache. The man who had mentioned the debt, he hadn't said more. He just looked at her as if waiting for her to remember something she never knew in the first place. "You said Tom saved someone," she said finally. "That he disappeared the next morning. Why?" The biker across from her gave a slow, resigned shrug. "Because of Ray." "That name again, who's Ray?" she asked, though her gut was already bracing for the answer. There was a pause. Then the man with the pale buzz cut spoke. His voice was quieter than the others, but carried weight like gravel under tires. "Ray Hollister was our leader. Back when we were still calling ourselves a club, before things got messy. He was the kind of man people followed, even when they shouldn't." Mabel listened, her pulse rising. Tom used to ride for him. Trusted him. But Ray crossed a line, several lines. We were supposed to deliver some parts, just parts. That's all Tom thought it was. Turned out it wasn't parts. It was heroin. Tom lost it, said he wouldn't be part of it, that we'd all burn if we kept going. The gray-haired man picked it up from there. There was a fight. Ray didn't take betrayal kindly. Tom walked disappeared before Ray could retaliate. We helped cover for him, said he died in a crash outside Tucson. Kept it quiet. But Ray never believed it. Mabel gripped the counter to keep from swaying. So you're saying Tom was hiding? Not hiding, said the older man. Protecting you in this place. She stared at them, all these men with weathered faces and scars they didn't bother to hide. Each of them tied to a life her husband never spoke of. Each of them carrying a piece of a puzzle she was only now beginning to see. And now? She asked, why come here now? The man with the pale buzz cut looked at her with something like regret. Because Ray got out. A long silence. 3 weeks ago, he's looking for something. We figured he'd come here first. And if he doesn't find what he wants, ... He didn't finish the sentence. Mabel didn't need him to. Mabel had heard the word pact before. In books, in Sunday sermons, even in late-night conversations between Tom and his old friend Hank, back when the diner was still busy and life was simpler. But never had it felt so real, so heavy as it did when the pale-haired man placed the box on the counter in front. Of her it was a simple tin box, no larger than a loaf of bread. The kind of thing you'd expect to find recipes in. But when she opened it, it was anything but ordinary. Inside were old photos, grainy, creased, marked with time. Some were of Tom, younger and leaner, wearing a leather vest and laughing with. The same men now sitting in her diner. Others were more somber. A group standing beside a burned-out van. A snapshot of a child's shoe beside a broken bottle. Each image seemed to carry a weight Mabel wasn't ready for. Beneath the photos was a small cassette recorder. One of the men she didn't even catch, which nodded toward it. He wanted you to hear it if things ever came back around. With trembling fingers, she pressed play. Tom's voice filled the room, crackling but unmistakably his. Mabs? If you're listening, I guess my past finally caught up. I always meant to tell you everything. I just never wanted this world touching you. Mabel leaned against the wall, tears pricking her eyes. We made a pact, the 5 of us. After Ray's betrayal, we swore to never speak of what we'd seen, what we'd done. We destroyed the records, hid the money, left the life. But we also swore something else. If Ray ever got out, we'd finish what we started. The recording paused, like Tom had to take a breath even in death. You were my clean slate, Mabs. You made me believe I could be a good man. I don't regret walking away, but I regret keeping this from you. I just didn't want you to see me the way I used to be. Then softer. If Ray shows up, don't run, don't beg. Look him in the eye and tell him the fire died with the 5th. He'll know what it means. The tape clicked off. Mabel stood frozen. The room was silent again, except for the rain easing into a soft drizzle outside. She turned to the men, her voice firm despite the tears. What does it mean? That phrase? The gray-haired man answered. There were 5 of us who knew where. Ray buried the real evidence, what he was really guilty of. One by one, Ray tracked us, tried to get it back. Tom was the last. Mabel looked down at the tin box. And now I am? The man nodded. You're the 5th. By morning, the rain had thinned to a mist. The storm that had threatened to tear the roof off the maple and pine had passed, leaving behind puddles and silence. Sunlight broke through in thin, hesitant rays, casting long shadows across the diner's tiled floor. The bikers were gone. No goodbyes. No engines roaring to life. Just a folded napkin on the counter, with 2 words scrawled in ballpoint ink. Thank you. Mabel stood by the window, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring out at the empty parking lot. It was hard to tell if the night before had been a dream or reckoning. Her apron still held Tom's letter, now soft from her hands. The tin box sat beneath the counter, wrapped in a dish towel like a relic too sacred to expose. She didn't know what came next. Would Ray Hollister show up? Would the cryptic message, the fire died with the 5th, be enough to stop him? Or had she just become a marked woman in a story too old and bloody to bury? She didn't feel afraid, not exactly. There was a strange calm in her now, as if part of her had always suspected Tom wasn't just a man who flipped pancakes and whistled. Patsy Cline, maybe it was the way he locked the back door twice every night. Or how he'd stare at the road some evenings like he was waiting for it to bring something back or take something away. She lit the open sign again, even though it was Sunday and she usually didn't work Sundays. Sheriff Curtis showed up at 8:17 on the dot, hat in hand, eyes tired but curious. He didn't ask any questions. Just ordered his usual and sat at the booth by the window. By noon, a few regulars trickled in. No one mentioned the motorcycles. No one asked about the power outage. June Miller came by and left a lemon pie with a note. He was a good man, even if none of us ever knew the whole story. And maybe that was the truth. Maybe no one ever really knows the whole story about the people they love. Around 3 o'clock, Mabel climbed into the attic. It took her a while, but she found the old cigar box. Inside, along with a few faded patches and a rusty lighter, was a single Polaroid. Tom and 4 other men standing in front of a fire. Not a campfire, something bigger, something destructive. Tom's face wasn't joyful, but it was resolute. On the back, in his handwriting, sometimes you burn it down to save what's left. Mabel tucked it into the tin box, closed the lid, and returned downstairs to refill the sugar canisters. The storm had passed, but the story, her story, had just begun. If you've made it this far, it means this story touched you in some way. So don't leave without subscribing. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And which part of this story moved you the most?